why in the opening pages of your book did you call Flair a bad booker?
Oh, because he was a bad booker.
How come you chose
like a very naughty bad booker? Because I was talking, you know, in my book I was talking about. I started out with the match I had with Vader, and the fact that I had a long talk with Flair that night before the match, and Flair was going to turn me heel, and his justification for that was saying, and I won't do the Ric Flair imitation, it's not that good, it's certainly not flattering to him, and I don't want people to think I'm trying to make fun of him here, because I'm not, but his justification was that Vader and I had the most brutal matches he'd ever seen, and when I came back, it didn't boost the ratings, so that was evidence to him that nobody cared about me as a babyface, and that I would need to be a heel. He said I talk like a heel, I work like a heel, and that was his decision. And had I not lost my ear that night in Munich, I would have been turned heel. It would have been a lackluster heel turn. And so actually losing my ear turned out to be a blessing in disguise.
So it was more that tied into the beginning of the book rather than you were looking to take a shot at.
Yeah, I wasn't looking at. I would have taken shots at him later on, but that definitely tied into it. But I would say that because I don't think, and he admits it was not. He says he'll admit he wasn't a good booker. I don't know. Maybe you find the quote there. He says, "I'll admit I was not a good booker because wrestling always came first." That's a huge point. I don't think people realize it. When you're a booker, you're holding other people's fate in the palm of your hands. And I think if there was a job description that said, you, Ric Flair, will be in charge of your own destiny as a wrestler, and you will never have anything to do with any other wrestler's storyline, life, therefore family, then you won't. I think he would have grabbed that in a second. I think he wanted to be the booker, and even though he will never go out and say he was the booker, he kind of relieves himself, absolves himself of any guilt whatsoever associated even with Steve Austin's departure and people that he had a direct impact on. He was the booker in two different instances in my life, you know, from when I joined WCW in '89 until he left as the booker. He was still part of the company. I think he left in April of '90, and then he was the booker from I'm trying to think, December of '93 until at least after I left in September of '94. And I don't think he took a lot of pride or even interest in creating characters and storylines, because I've worked with people that have, and I mean from Eric Embry in Dallas to Robert Fuller in Continental to guys I work with like Cornette and Kevin Sullivan in WCW, to Paul E, to Dusty. They get a sparkle in their eyes when they talked about doing angles, about creating storylines. And I didn't have that much personal interaction with Flair. Usually, especially in my first stint in WCW, you know, I think it was Sullivan and Cornette coming up with the ideas, specifically Sullivan. But I never got the feeling that not only was wrestling just secondary, but I never got the feeling that he cared that much at all about creating storylines or stars.
Do you think it was more Flair wanted the ego boost of being called Booker, and he was just concentrating on himself?
I don't think it was the ego boost. I think it was the fact, maybe in the beginning, you know, maybe in '90 with Hurd, but I think he saw being the Booker in '94 as an act of self-preservation. He had been screwed around a lot, and I think he saw that being the Booker was the only way he could make sure that he wasn't screwed around with more. That's just my feeling. I'm not sure.
What are your feelings about WWE marketing the Flair book around the negative comments he made about you and Bret?
Well, you know, the Bret stuff shouldn't have been in there at all. I don't know if Ric Flair knows that Bret Hart had a stroke. Maybe I'll tell him Bret Hart had a stroke. To comment on Owen's death and to really imply that it didn't mean much or as much to Bret as his career did is underhanded, and it's bush league, and Bret deserves better, and Flair, I think, is the worst to himself to come out in a book. That's part of the benefit of writing a book, is you can actually go back and see where you look like a dick and change it. And apparently he felt strongly enough about the controversy it would create, or maybe he honestly felt that way, to include it. And again, I in some ways I look at it as a compliment to me that arguably, I'll never call him the world's greatest wrestler, but he was arguably the world's greatest wrestler, and he was certainly up in that class in my eyes. that he writes a book about his career and has people talking about me. That's flattering in an odd type of way. I didn't agree with WWE wanting to capitalize on that. If it had worked out the way that they wanted it to, this video would be marketed by WWE. But as a dad, I don't believe in rewarding bad behavior, so I don't like, on principle, the idea of Ric Flair making money off my comments about his book. But I'm doing this because I don't mind if I make money off my comments about Ric Flair's book.
Have you and Brett talked about what Flair said?
Yeah. Brett and I have talked, and I'm very flattered that he stood up for me. I wish he hadn't had said that he thought I was a better worker than Flair, because I wasn't, A, and B, I think his anger took away some of his credibility. I think he should have been a given. Okay, Flair's a great wrestler, but he should not have said this stuff about Bret Hart. Brett was, he was just so damn mad, that he couldn't help himself.
Did you and Brett normally talk, or was it just kind of out of the blue?
I have kept in contact with Brett.
So it wasn't unusual that he would call you about this, or you would call him about this?
We're not in constant contact. He was calling me about this, but we have talked on, once a year or so. I have a, nice talk with Brett.